007 First Light, the newest Bond game in the franchise, has finally launched, and of course, the internet is, engaged in very passionate debates about this game at the moment. It's been quite interesting watching the events unfold over the last few hours. Now, I could, spend this time going over a lot of the technical discussions that are being had about the fact that the game feels very much like it's a mashup of the Uncharted and Hitman games put together. But as usual for this channel, I do like to focus on the larger impact on the franchise and story overall, and the things that people aren't necessarily talking about, but that they should really should be talking about.
I didn't catch your name.
I didn't give it.
Running concurrently with this over the past week or two, Amazon MGM Studios have also announced that they're actually in the casting process for their Bond TV show or streaming series, right? And that alignment with the First Light video game is no coincidence, right? This is all intentional. It's just a part of their marketing to run these concurrently so that each medium can benefit the other, right? All the conversations surrounding the Bond casting initially will sort of give an added boost to the First Light video game and vice versa, right? And what, again, people are not talking about is that this 007 First Light game is a testing ground for the direction that Amazon wants to take the character, right? The casting news that have been revealed so far is that they are looking to cast a younger Bond, and as you've seen with the First Light video game, they've gone with a younger Bond. Again, none of this is really coincidental. Now, again, numerous debates happening where the franchise is concerned. Some, valid. Others, I suppose, what people have termed it's a product of its time, right? The most significant of the discussions being around the changes to Bond as a character. Number one being, if you've all seen the posters that have been making the rounds of for the game, it's been out for several months now, really. But it's not really gotten as much traction as it is today. And it's the picture with Bond surrounded by 3 or 4 women. And obviously they spared no expense. I suppose the realization being that they can't race swap Bond, so they'll just race swap everyone around the character. And so that poster just looks like, I suppose it's an accurate representation of what modern day England currently looks like, and that's part of what people are highlighting, right? How Bond, a quintessentially English character, is in a video game where that doesn't feel very English at all, right? And this is something that a lot of these franchises usually pride themselves on, right? He hasn't always been English, but he's always been someone from the UK. And it's always been representative of that populace at the time. And obviously looking at the First Light characters now, there's been a lot of changes to several characters. The one that's I think is being discussed a fair bit at the moment is the character of M, right? Which in the First Light promotional material so far has been cast as an Indian woman, right? And a lot of the counter arguments to that is M has been a woman for several decades since Judi Dench, played that part in the 1995 film alongside Pierce Brosnan. And this is where the danger, I believe, lies when it comes to a lot of revisionist history, right? Where the marker for what is accurate is the most current thing in someone's mind. And I've encountered a number of individuals on Twitter and so on throughout the day who keep pointing to Judi Dench and that 1995 GoldenEye film, as if that is somehow the source material, because they're as far as their experience with Bond goes, it doesn't go beyond that point. So that is their frame of reference. And the danger there is in, and we've seen it happening, we've seen it happen with a lot of series, whether it's Star Trek, Star Wars, and so on, where the existing source material is ignored for what is the current social narrative. And the argument that they've made with M is that, well, she was cast as Judi Dench was cast as M in 1995, and so we shouldn't then have an issue with a woman being M ordering Bond around. No. Then when you point out the very obvious in that, obviously the books are the source material, and M, for those of you who don't know, M is a high-ranking government official, I believe Vice Admiral Miles Messervy, right? He's been in the Fleming's novel since 1953. That is the source material. That is the character. He's always been male. He's always been a male authority figure throughout the franchise. Someone who has served this country and is qualified to provide guidance to this super spy that is Bond, highly respected individual. What we have gotten once we fast forwarded to Judi Dench taking on that role is, just added this woman for diversity's sake. No qualifications in the field that would equip her to instruct Bond versus, as a military man would be able to. And so that is now the foundation for all the arguments that are being made. It's that we changed this in 1995, and so this is now the new standard. And this is something that I've cautioned people about on this channel quite often. And it's that once you cede ground and allow these small nuanced changes to take place, there's no turning back there, right? Because once you've given them an inch, they will keep making more and more changes. And with each change, they will use that prior change as precedence for the new change to come. And one of the things that I've often pointed to, I'll try to find it if I can, it's how that transition has taken place with Bond over the years. First, it was with Judi Dench, and then Pierce Brosnan and Michelle Yeoh, right, on the back of a bicycle. Sorry, on the back of a motorcycle. Bond holding one of the handlebars and Michelle Yeoh holding the other, right? So it went from Bond being the spy who had to find these clever ways to get out of situations to him needing the help of Michelle Yeoh's character. She's now sharing the screen with him. And then fast forward again a few years, and then, have Daniel Craig's Bond, who's now on the back of a moped with the new 007, a black woman, driving the way forward. It's the nuance changes, right? Once you agreed to Judi Dench, then you would agree to Michelle Yeoh sharing the screen with Bond. And once you agree with that, then you will also agree with Bond sitting at the back of a motorcycle. It's the small nuance changes. I think oftentimes we do get caught up with the in-your-face messaging and progressive instructions from Hollywood. We've become sort of numb to it, and we start to ignore the more subtle changes that are actually taking place. And Bond is a perfect example of this. Now, the character of M, why is that important? Right? I think we've all seen at this point one of the more consistent things or messages that Hollywood has been propagating over the years is the deconstruction of a lot of male authority figures. and how that's been permeated in the television and film over the course of several years. And as you've watched Star Wars, Star Trek, and all these beloved franchises, Predator, where these male characters, particularly the older male figures, the men with authority who have earned authority, there seems to be a concerted effort to remove those characters from media. So you see it with, Indiana Jones. He's old. He's outdated, has archaic ways, so he needs to step aside. And you saw it with Luke Skywalker, the very same thing. He's old. He's losing it. He's lost his value and purpose, and he needs to step aside. And for a long time, I think people thought that this idea of the progressive messaging, or what they call woke, people seem to believe that this is something new, right? That this is something that started in the 2000s, late 2000s, mid 2000s. This has been going on for several decades now, right? And it's no surprise that, again, I suppose back then they had to be nuanced about it, but now it's complete, it's mask off. They're very blatant and very obvious and very in your face with it now. But the only reason we were able to get to this point where they can now make these significant changes, where they feel confident enough that they can make these changes without sufficient pushback from the public, the reason they now feel confident in doing that is because you've already given them permission. You've already said in '95 that Judi Dench was fine. It's okay to gender swap the male authority figure in the Ian Fleming's novels and give that role to a woman who is not qualified to be in that position. But for diversity's sake, we will allow it. And once you allow that, then I'm afraid that you've just given them permission to only continue making changes. So that, I think, is a very pivotal issue. It's the erasure of male authority figures, right? And now you have this scenario with Bond 007 First Light, where Bond is now taking orders from several women. There are no male authority figures for him to look to. And this is especially important because they've chosen to select a younger Bond, because the idea here is that Bond now needs to learn from the people around him. And who's around him? Just women.
Bond is immature and reckless. Headstrong. Thrill-seeking. Issues with authority.
Needs our new star air crewman Bond.
Do you mind telling me why I'm here?
I want to make you a spy.
St. John Smythe, my dear.
009 is a master manipulator.
To catch him, we're going to need eyes everywhere.
When you're ready, Bond.
What about the girl?
A means to an end.
That's an interesting pickup line.
Whatever his endgame is, we won't see it coming.
That's the first point of contention I've seen, is the casting of M. And those new fans who, many of whom had no idea that M is supposed to be a man, or he's a man in the novels, their exposure to Bond is just very recent. And, heaven forbid they actually do some research to try to find out more about the character. Oh, the second is one that has been talked about for quite some time, and along the side of the censorship debate that we've had so many times when it comes to video games, and that is whether or not Bond, being the chauvinist and sexist as he was in the earlier adaptations and source material, whether there's a need to strip that away, right? A lot of the reviews have come out and praised this game for how it handles that, and you know, shying away from what they term misogyny, where Bond as a character is concerned. My position on that is simple, and that is, it's okay for male characters to be depicted as having flaws. And to be honest, to be frank, many of what's now termed a flaw really isn't. But to be generous, in that criticism, it's okay for male characters to be flawed. Bond is, as he's defined by the author, he is a spy. He needs to operate in these critical conditions where it's life or death. And being in that situation, it's perfectly fine for him to use his wits about him, his charm, charisma, to manipulate, use these women to get information, to ensure that the mission is successful. It's interesting to me that whenever there's a scenario where the roles are flipped and there's a woman who's using her feminine guile and sexuality to use these men as a stepping stone to get to what she actually wants, this is something that is universally praised, and she's using the tools that she has to get what she wants, and that is perfectly fine. But the moment this applies to a man, then it somehow becomes problematic. So is there really a need to soften Bond? I don't believe so. The character is written because this is how he is described. These are the things that he needs to do in order to accomplish the mission. And oftentimes, particularly with the Bond version of the character, we're seeing sort of a revision of what the character is intended to be, because Bond now hates his job. And this goes back to the whole deconstruction of the masculine character, where Daniel Craig's Bond has fallen prey to becoming that overly sympathetic character that constantly needs to be mothered, right? And it's quite unfortunate to see the direction that they've taken the character. But Bond likes his job. He likes that he gets to do spy things. He gets to sleep around. He gets to put himself in these life-threatening situations for the greater good. These aren't things that we need to mask and sanitize and make sterile and do away with. It's fine for the character to exist in this way. But what we're seeing happening now in Hollywood is that all the male characters need to fit in this one mold. And that is before your eyes, look at the films that have come out just this past year alone, whether it's He-Man, Mortal Kombat, all these movies that have been coming out, all the male characters, the male IP. I would include Mario in that as well. It's trying to deconstruct, to break down all these male characters and recreate them in this one mold where they must all be the same safe and sterile character that is inoffensive, safe. And in large part, this is to appease the feminine audience. You know that's the end goal here. For Bond being a masculine character, he, over the course of 70 years, he's already built up a fan base for the male audience. And so what a lot of these studios are looking for is, how do we expand to a female audience? And the only way to do that is to make the character less masculine and more feminine. Now, short term, that might be effective. Long term, that is how you kill your brand. Because as we've discussed on this channel time and time again, male characters who are feminine tend to not attract a lot of male audience members. You may get that because of the brand that Bond carries, but over time you are going to lose the audience. And simultaneously, the same will happen with the female audience as well, because as it turns out, women don't like men who act like women. I think it was the He-Man actor over the course of the last few weeks who have said, his depiction of He-Man is going to be, it's supposed to be a middle ground between masculinity and femininity. Why would we want a very masculine character in He-Man to embody feminine nature and feminine qualities? These are the instructions that he's most likely being given, that this is a performance that he needs to give. And so we know where Hollywood stands, right? Which is why I've said earlier in the video that one of the things people need to pay attention to is what is happening at Amazon MGM Studios, because they are looking at this video game, this Bond First Light video game, as a template to see what works, what the audience is willing to accept. And if you do not reject this version of Bond, then be prepared, because that is what you'll be getting in the Amazon streaming series. The exact same Bond, which is a Bond without agency, Bond afraid to take risks, Bond that is safe. It's effectively just Bond in name alone, not much Bond at all. One of the things that I've seen being circulated online, again, is the discussion about Bond's relationship with female characters, because I'm sure you've all remembered the Sean Connery interview and his position on the male-female dynamic, right? And so a lot of the discussion around the character at the moment is the concern that a lot of the female characters in the game aren't necessarily Bond girls that we've come to know over the years, and that concern is quite valid for everything that we've seen Hollywood, the changes that we've seen them make over the years, censor mostly the female characters, not censoring the male characters. I have to keep going back to He-Man, but it was really fascinating to watch that He-Man was dressed in more revealing clothing than Teela was. So they censored Teela, but kept He-Man's clothing to a bare minimum. It's really fascinating to watch Hollywood destroy itself. But yeah, I mean, back to Bond, it's a valid concern, and a lot of the discourse that I've seen, people are sharing these clips of these women in the game to as proof that the game isn't shying away from that. Bond does have access to all these women, but he doesn't. Merely speaking to women, and this just highlights how starved a lot of these men must be for some sort of positive depiction in video gaming. Because the argument it seems to be that because Bond engages in conversation with a lot of these women, then somehow that automatically means these are Bond girls. And Bond is still very much a womanizer. And when you press them to give you the dialogue to see what exactly has happened, how does Bond engage with these women? And this is the test that I keep asking people online. If it is that if we change the name of this First Light game and call it something else, then we ask someone who doesn't know anything about video games, if we show them certain clips from this game and ask them which franchise do they think this game is from, no one would guess that this is a Bond franchise, because it is Bond in name only. Now, if you take a clip from, I don't know, the GoldenEye game showing an interaction between Brosnan's Bond and one of the Bond girls, someone will recognize that this is Bond just by virtue of how he leads the conversation, the conversation that actually takes place. Well, first of all, before we even get there, the dead giveaway would be the Bond girl's name, right? Because the Bond girls had all these absolutely wonderful names that I can't repeat here.
Who are you?
My name is Pussy Galore.
I must be dreaming.
But if you know, you know, right? Uh, yeah, they had these ridiculous names that made it very clear that these were women that Bond will at some point have some sexual exploitation with, right? So it was very interesting. But first off, you'd immediately know that this is Bond just by how sort of campy the name of these women are, but it's a bit tongue in cheek, but clever at the same time, and very mature, right? And humorous in some way. So the tone would let you know that this is Bond. But if not, right, even if that was not the case, as the conversations went on and you saw how Bond carries himself, how he approaches the woman, how he starts the conversation, his charisma, the lines that he would use, I'm sure, again, very hilarious. Just from the interaction alone, Bond leading that conversation and the woman's response to him, all of that would be a dead giveaway that this is a Bond game. Now, if we now examine the First Light game, where Bond is approaching a lot of these women, first off, for a lot of the women that he does engage with in the game, and I've noticed this in a lot of Hollywood media now, Bond needs to get permission from these women just to hit on them. And one of the snippets that people have been circling online showing Bond having conversations with these women, and then when you watch the actual clip, it's Bond going up to the women to ask them something, some generic question, and then they hit on Bond first, and then he responds to say, to make some remark, right? It's never a scenario where Bond is on a mission. He sees a woman who he believes may prove useful to him or have some information that he can use to complete the mission, and then he proceeds to wow and captivate that woman, get her into bed, get what he needs, whether it's her key card, some information she needs, whatever the case is, and then leave to get the quest. That would be a Bond response, taking the initiative, having agency, a leading man, right? Approaching those women with that objective in mind to get what he needs. That would be Bond. But what we've seen in the First Light video game so far, it's quite the opposite of that. Bond has no agency. The women have to first hit on him and give him permission for him to say, okay, now I can do X or Y. And it's as if HR is in the room with Bond when he's having these conversations with the woman. And it's so indefensible. It's just really interesting to see, to watch people. I know part of it is just out of sheer desperation, because a lot of people want something to be good. They want Bond to be good so bad that they're willing to just make excuses for a lot of what they're seeing. And it's a poison pill, because you're laying the groundwork for them to make more changes to Bond, because and again, as I said, it's the same thing with the Judi Dench example I gave at the beginning. You keep ceding ground to these developers, and of course they will graciously accept a lot of these things that you're willing to accept, and they will continue to make changes. Yeah, I think where this game is concerned, whatever its merits, at a certain point, as a gamer, you do have to draw a line and decide whether this is something you think should be rewarded, because that's what it comes down to, right? You either reward the studios for the changes that they have made, which gives them the permission to continue making more of these changes, or you draw a line and say, no, this is not Bond, This is not a character that I know and love. You need to go back to the drawing board and try again. It's one of two options, right? And the more you choose, the more you seed ground to these changes and allow them to continue to make changes, the more the franchise that you know and love, the more you bastardize it, right? And I can't imagine that you can truly call yourself a fan if you enjoy seeing the very character that you claim to be a fan of be stripped apart and rewritten. Because that is the end goal. The reason for casting Bond as a young actor, the entire purpose behind that is so that they can rewrite that character into something new. Right? One of the things I've heard people say is, um, I suppose a counter argument to a lot of what I've said is that they cast Bond as a young man, and that is the reason for his demeanor being different. No, my response to this is quite simple. It's if Bond was chauvinist, misogynist, and a sexist in his later years, have you ever met a man who was who was less of those things in his younger years than he was as he got older? It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. Right? You know, you're never gonna convince anyone that Bond as a younger man wasn't more chauvinistic, more misogynist, or more sexist. Because in your younger days, you're more reckless. You're more likely to take chances and go at these things. There are no limits to what you can do when you're that younger. So the argument just does not hold up. Bond as a younger man would be more of all of those things. Bond as a younger man would be more misogynistic, more sexist, and more of a chauvinist. Because as a young man, he has all these resources and the power and the responsibility. He would take advantage of that to do everything that he could ever want to do. There's no scenario, particularly there's no scenario where you're gonna find a man who's a womanizer, a horny womanizer in his later years. There's no scenario where you're gonna find that he was less that in his younger years. No, usually in your 20s, as this younger Bond is, you will have those tendencies, and then as you get older, and obviously your brain develops, and you have more responsibility, and you start prioritizing different things, and you know, testosterone levels sort of peter off. Then you start to think less about that stuff. But Bond in his younger years absolutely would be much, much worse. And that's the Bond. If they had given us that Bond, I would not be here making this video today. So that argument doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The reason why they've chosen to go younger is so that they can try to strip away a lot of those toxic masculine traits that they feel Bond originally had. That is the reason for it, right? And again, as I said, look around you, right? We've had several examples of this ongoing right now. In the Super Mario movies, as I've said, you know, countless times, you know, Mario was not able to save Peach in his own movie because a damsel in distress is now seen as archaic, and you know, saving one is now toxic masculinity. With the recent He-Man promotion, again, the director has come out and spoken about Skeletor being the representation of toxic masculinity and all of that. We see what is happening. You see what is happening, right? You know, you can try to avert your eyes in the hopes that you can just be entertained, but you know, short-term sacrifice for a long-term gain. At a certain point, you've got to make a choice. If you want these things to become better, then you need to make some short-term sacrifice and have a long-term gain. Because yeah, continually going down this road, it's just another franchise that's going to be destroyed. It is. And as I've said, you know, Amazon is looking at this, and they're going to make their decision based on how this game performs. Most likely they'll move forward with it regardless. You know, if you look at things like Rings of Power and what they've done with a lot of, you know, the boys, for example, they're not opposed to going against public will, right? And just emasculating all these characters that you're possibly rooting for. And so they may just continue moving forward regardless, because they've been deliberating on what direction they need to take Bond for quite a few years now. And it's a bit unfortunate that the Bond estate has just given Amazon, you know, the freedom, the creative freedom to just do anything that they want to do. You know, I think legacy is important. You know, the author had a specific tone and character in mind for Bond, and I believe personally that they should have fought to keep that. And I know they did for several years, but you know, I wish they had continued to carry on that fight. But that is it. You know, 007 First Light. The usual critics have come out in droves to praise this game, like they have, like with the same with Mixtape, several other games prior to it. These people are, you know, it's Access Media. They're just here to see whatever the corporations have paid them to see, and that's pretty much it. But you will need to, you know, see with your own eyes what these characters embody. Look to the original intent from the author, the source material. Do these characters represent that, or do they betray that? And, you know, make your decision. I personally believe in this case that this is a bastardization of what Bond is intended to be, and I don't want to hear that Bond as a character cannot exist in this era. I personally don't believe that that is true. The reason why we've seen such a steep decline in a lot of film attendance in Hollywood, and video games are sort of on the decline as well. It's because we've abandoned a lot of these qualities that worked for films and video games and so on. But I'm of the belief that we fortunately need to let these things fail, so that other studios, most likely foreign studios, can rise from the ashes and give the audience what they actually need. There's no need to change Bond. The character is not archaic or sexist or misogynistic. These are character traits that he possesses, and he should be depicted exactly how the author intended. If people find some of those things offensive, then don't play the game, don't watch it. But you know, bastardizing the character to the point where he's no longer recognizable, no, that's never going to be a game that I personally am going to support, and neither should you, right? All right, that is it for this video, guys. Bit of a long one, but it's unfortunate. Bond is one of the last remaining masculine IP, and longest running as well, for over 70 years, and it would be a shame to see the franchise fall in the same way that many others before it has. But here's hoping that you know, maybe things go in a different direction and Amazon rethinks what they want to do with the character. You know, we'll see. All right, guys, thanks very much for stopping by, and see you for the next one.